They dug a trench in 1917 and uncovered something not human. What ancient evil did soldiers accidentally awaken under the soil of no man's land? It was the winter of 1917, a year marked by global chaos and unrelenting warfare. Amidst the trenches of the Western Front, where the air was thick with the stench of smoke and blood, something unimaginable was about to unfold. A group of soldiers, huddled in the dark, damp earth, had no idea that what they were about to uncover would shatter the very foundation of everything they knew about the world and themselves. What would you have done if you were there, in that trench, when they uncovered it? The thing that wasn't supposed to exist? The object, the presence, or whatever it was, that shouldn't have been in the earth at all? The story begins with a single, whispered rumor, something no one dared speak of at first. An excavation. Routine. Just another task to keep the men busy as they endured the endless war, turned into an excavation of a very different sort. The ground had been disturbed. It was supposed to be an old, abandoned bunker filled with nothing but relics of the past, old supplies. But as the men dug deeper, as the clinking of their shovels met the cold, unforgiving dirt, they unearthed something far more sinister. No one could explain what they found. No one wanted to. There was nothing extraordinary at first. The mound of dirt looked like any other in a battlefield, but it was what came next, the sudden discovery that took their breath away, that would haunt them forever. The darkness they unearthed wasn't something that belonged to the war. It wasn't something that belonged to this world at all. Some called it a relic, others called it a curse, still some simply called it it. And as the days went on, it became more and more apparent that what they had found was no ordinary object. It was more than just strange. It was something not human. But how could they explain it? How could anyone? You see, this wasn't just about the war. It wasn't about the soldiers or the mud or the guns. No, this was about something much bigger, something older, something that had waited in the shadows of history, waiting for the right moment to be uncovered. And when it was, the world changed forever. There were whispers at first. They were skeptical. It was an object like no other, and no one dared touch it. But that didn't stop the questions. Where had it come from? What was it really? And perhaps most haunting of all, what did it want? That moment when the trench fell silent became the point of no return. They had disturbed something ancient and powerful, and once it was unleashed, there was no going back. What would you do if it happened to you? Would you dare touch it? Would you walk away, pretending you didn't see? Or would you delve deeper, knowing that the answers you seek could either save you or doom you? The discovery was unsettling, to say the least. As the men looked at the strange object, a peculiar dark shape half buried in the cold, damp earth, they couldn't quite make sense of it. It wasn't just old or broken. No, this felt wrong. The way it shimmered in the dim light, almost as if it were alive, made their skin crawl. But what truly unnerved them was its size. Far larger than anything a person could easily carry or hide, it seemed almost out of place, an anomaly that should never have been in this trench. As the soldiers gathered around, whispering in low voices, each one felt an unspoken sense of dread. The kind of dread that sinks into your bones, making the hairs on the back of your neck stand at attention. It was as if the earth itself was protesting the discovery, shifting uncomfortably under their feet, almost like it had been disturbed by something that didn't belong. "Leave it," someone said, their voice hushed but firm. "It's bad luck. We don't mess with things like this." But the curiosity was too strong, and the orders too clear. The object had to be moved. There was no room for hesitation in wartime, not even with something so unnerving. With trepidation, one of the soldiers knelt down and gently brushed the dirt away from the object. The rest of the men stood back, uncertain, eyes wide with a mix of awe and fear. The more they uncovered, the stranger it became. It was made of something that looked almost unnatural, too smooth, too perfect. But it wasn't stone, nor metal, nor anything they had ever seen before. There were no markings, no visible signs of age, and no obvious origin. It didn't belong to any civilization they knew of, and it wasn't an artifact of war. This was something else, something ancient, something otherworldly. As the days passed, the object was moved to the camp. A few men volunteered to transport it, though as they carried it, each step seemed to add weight to the already heavy burden they all felt. The trench, once a place of camaraderie and shared suffering, now felt different. The laughter stopped. The usual chatter faded into an eerie silence. They couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed them back to their camp. It wasn't long before strange occurrences began. At night, the shadows cast by the campfires seemed to grow longer, more distorted. Whispers filled the air, but when the men turned to look, there was no one there. They would hear soft, faint sounds, footsteps, perhaps, but when they turned their heads, nothing. The air itself grew heavy, as though it were charged with an unseen force, pressing in on them from all sides. It started subtly. A soldier would find his boots in a different place than where he left them. A piece of equipment would disappear, only to show up in the most unexpected spot. But the unsettling things didn't stop there. One morning, a soldier reported hearing what sounded like a voice not of this world. Soft, almost melodic, but foreign. It whispered something that no one could understand, and yet, somehow, they all understood the same thing. It was a warning. Despite the unease, no one dared abandon the object. Some said it was cursed. Others believed it was an ancient artifact with powers beyond their comprehension. But no one could say for sure. The tension mounted. The whispers grew louder. The signs became clearer. There was something else in the camp, something watching them. And one by one, the men began to feel its presence, lurking in the periphery, just out of sight, but always near. Still, they tried to rationalize it. It was the war, stress, exhaustion. It wasn't real. It couldn't be. But as the days went on, reality began to blur. The men started seeing things, shadowy figures lurking in the corners of their vision, flickering and vanishing before they could make out anything more. A light, like a strange, glowing mist, would drift past the campfire, vanishing into the night. The strange happenings weren't just in the camp, either. Even those who went into the forest to fetch supplies began reporting odd lights in the distance. They weren't lanterns or flares. These were different. They pulsed with an unnatural rhythm, flickering like a heartbeat, drawing the eyes and unsettling the soul. And then, one night, a man disappeared. It wasn't the first time a soldier had gone missing in the trenches, but this time was different. No trace, no sign, just gone. A search party was sent out immediately, but when they returned hours later, their faces were pale, their eyes wide with fear. They had found nothing. No tracks, no evidence the man had ever been there. But something had changed. One of the men swore he saw something moving in the distance, a shape, but not human. Something that darted between the trees, always just beyond the reach of their light. "What did you see?" someone asked, but the soldier couldn't answer. He was shaking too hard, his mind somewhere far away, lost in something none of them could understand. As the unease spread through the camp, the whispers started again, this time more insistent, more demanding. But still they couldn't explain what was happening. There were no answers, only questions, and one undeniable truth. Whatever they had uncovered in the trench was far beyond their understanding. What was it? And why had it chosen now to reveal itself? There's a man who lived through it, one of the few who can still recall the events clearly. His name was Samuel Grant, though most of the men who knew him just called him Sam. His voice is quiet now, but when he speaks of that time, it's as though the years fall away, and he's right back there, standing in the shadows of the trench, the cold biting at his bones. Sam wasn't the first to see the thing that came from the earth, but he was the one who made it out. And that fact alone makes his story different. He's the one who stayed behind when the rest fled, the one who returned to the trench long after the others had disappeared into the night, never to be seen again. It's Sam who carries the weight of that discovery, the burden of what happened. When Sam talks about it, his voice shakes, but not from fear. It's the kind of tremble that comes from a deep, unshakable sorrow. It's the same sorrow that had driven him to tell his story to anyone who would listen, though fewer and fewer people believed him as the years passed. I remember the first time I saw it, Sam tells anyone who's willing to listen. It wasn't just the object. It was the air around it. It felt wrong, like the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. Sam's eyes flicker to the window, as if seeing something beyond the ordinary world, lost in a place where the past and the present blur. He runs a hand through his weathered hair, and his breath catches as the memories flood him again. Back then, we didn't know what we were dealing with, he continues. It was just another damn thing to move, another stupid thing to dig up and move so the higher-ups could gawk at it. But we should have known better. We all should have. He pauses for a moment, his gaze lost in thought. It wasn't just strange, it felt like something was watching us, like the earth was watching us. That's the only way I can describe it. You could feel the weight of it, like it was waiting for something, and we were just the fools who'd unearthed it. The men who had seen it, the ones who were still alive, didn't speak much of it. Not until it was too late. But Sam remembers it all too well. The feeling of being pulled into something that went far beyond their comprehension. The fear of realizing that they weren't just dealing with some odd relic, but with something far darker, something that wanted them. Sam remembers the first night after the trench had been unearthed, how the men had tried to dismiss the strange occurrences at first, the whispers, the shadows in the dark. But it wasn't long before they realized that something wasn't right. And Sam, the one who had always been the most skeptical, had felt it the hardest. It wasn't until that night, the night we lost Turner, that I knew something was wrong, Sam says, his voice growing darker. Private Turner had been a quiet man, barely older than a boy, but he was strong. One of the ones who could lift morale during the worst days in the trenches. He was the kind of guy who would joke about the dirt and the rats, always making light of things to keep the others from losing hope. That night, Turner had gone missing. His comrades had searched the area, calling his name, their voices growing desperate with each hour that passed. There was no sign of him, no tracks, no footprints. The forest where he had disappeared was silent, unnaturally still. And then there was the scream. Sam shakes his head, his breath coming in short, uneven bursts as if he can still hear it. The scream had torn through the night air, distant but unmistakable. A man's voice, but not Turner's, something else, something twisted. We found Turner's jacket the next morning, Sam continues, just lying there in the mud, the buttons still gleaming in the early light, but no Turner, just his jacket. And I swear to you, I heard it that night. Something. It wasn't human. Sam stands and walks toward the small window of his home, his hands resting on the frame. His gaze seems lost in the distance, far beyond the present, as if he's still seeing the horror from that night. By the time we got back to the trench, we were different. I was different. We all were. It wasn't just that one missing man, it was the change. Something was different about the air. The trench had a smell to it, a thickness in the air that made it harder to breathe. I've never been able to describe it, but I know that's when it started. He turns, his expression heavy with the weight of his words. You see, that's when the dreams began. Sam had tried to keep a level head. He'd seen enough horrors in the trenches to make him hard as stone. But this was something he couldn't escape. Every night, the dreams came. At first, they were fleeting, just flashes of images, faces, whispers in the dark. But as the days wore on, the dreams became clearer, more vivid. He recalls the first one clearly. I was in the trench again, only it wasn't like before. It was darker, colder. And that thing we found, it was there. It was hovering, like it wasn't even touching the ground, and it was speaking to me, but not with words. I could hear it in my mind, in my soul. It wanted me to… what? I couldn't tell. But I knew it wanted something. And I knew it wasn't good. It's the nightmares that began to erode his mind, the paranoia that crept in, blurring the line between dream and reality. There was no escape. There was no way to outrun it. The thing had found him, and it wasn't going to let him go. Sam leans forward, gripping the arms of his chair as though bracing for the weight of his words. But I'm here, right? I made it out. And that's the part nobody understands. I don't know how, but I did. I'm the only one left who knows the truth. And believe me, it's not something you want to know. The room falls into an eerie silence, the weight of Sam's story hanging in the air. But the truth was simple, really. The trench wasn't just a place where men fought and died. It was a place where something else was waiting for the right moment, waiting for someone to uncover it. And they did. And that moment came. The whispers, the nightmares, and the strange phenomena. They weren't just in Sam's mind. They weren't isolated to one man or one camp. By the time the object had been fully unearthed and moved into the main trench, a sense of inevitability began to settle over everyone. The soldiers could feel it, deep in their bones. Something had awakened. Something far older and more dangerous than they could possibly imagine. The strange occurrences didn't stop at shadows flickering at the edge of vision or the echoes of voices that were never there. No, as the days passed, they began to escalate. The very atmosphere around the trench seemed to thicken. The cold, which was always present in those war-torn fields, began to feel suffocating, as though it had taken on a life of its own. The wind, once a source of reprieve, now howled through the night with a chilling, unnatural tone, like the voice of something trapped, desperately trying to escape. The men had grown used to the constant battle against fatigue, hunger, and fear. But nothing had prepared them for what they began to experience now. It started slowly, almost imperceptibly. A soldier would turn to speak to someone and find that person standing motionless, eyes wide, staring at something in the distance. When they spoke, their voice was a little too high, a little too thin, but they couldn't explain what they'd seen. Only that something had been there. Something had moved, but when they looked again, it was gone. One by one, the men began to experience it. They'd wake in the middle of the night, breath shallow, heart racing, certain that something was watching them. They'd hear scratching sounds just beyond the tent flaps, like claws running across the canvas. And when they would throw the flap open to investigate, there would be nothing there. Nothing at all. But the terror would stay with them, like a shadow, clinging to their souls. Then, the physical manifestations began. It started with the light. In the dead of night, one of the soldiers had seen it first. A soft glow, a faint, almost imperceptible light that seemed to float just above the ground. It wasn't from a lantern or a flare. It was something entirely different, something that felt wrong in its very existence. The light pulsed gently, like a heartbeat. At first, the soldier thought it might be a trick of the eyes, fatigue, perhaps, or the reflection of a distant fire. But as he watched, it became undeniable. This wasn't natural. The light didn't flicker like a flame, didn't cast shadows like a lantern. It was as if the air itself had become illuminated, as though it were alive. That night, Sam had been the first to venture towards the source of the light. He had been unable to resist, drawn to it by something that he couldn't name. Something ancient, something that spoke to him on a primal level. As Sam approached, the air around him grew colder, heavier. He felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. And that's when he saw it. A shape. Barely. Visible, but unmistakable. It hovered just above the ground, floating in the air like some kind of spectral entity. For a moment, Sam was paralyzed, caught in a silent standoff with whatever it was. Then it was gone. Gone as quickly as it had appeared, leaving Sam standing there, trembling, his heart pounding in his chest. His breath came in short gasps, and his legs felt weak, as though the earth itself had shifted beneath him. But it wasn't just the light. No, that was only the beginning. The men began to experience other things. Objects began to move on their own. Knives sliding across tables, a rifle gently tipping over, as if nudged by an invisible hand. Sometimes whole tents would be found collapsed, their contents scattered across the ground, even though no one had touched them. And then the sounds began. It wasn't the normal hum of the battlefield, the distant gunfire or the muffled screams of men lost in the fog of war. No, these sounds were different, unnatural. They came from within the earth itself. At first it was just faint rumblings, like the sound of someone deep underground, moving through tunnels, scraping against the walls. But as time passed, the sounds grew louder, more distinct. It was as if something was alive beneath the ground, something stirring, waking, and pushing its way up toward the surface. It was during one of these tremors that the first real incident occurred. Corporal Ferguson was on guard duty when he heard it. The scraping, the shuffling noise. It wasn't just under the ground anymore. It was coming from the very trench itself. Panic surged through him as he scanned the dark, listening for the sound of footsteps, but hearing nothing. Yet the noise continued, growing louder, closer. Ferguson's breath quickened as the sound came right up behind him, but when he turned, there was nothing. Nothing but the darkness. His heart was racing now, his fingers trembling as he fumbled with his rifle. The trench was empty, and yet he wasn't alone. The noise didn't stop. But the fear did something to Ferguson. It didn't make him run. It made him stay and listen. And that was when it happened. A shape, indistinct at first, a blur in the corner of his vision, moved toward him. Ferguson's hand shot out, his fingers barely grazing the object, but just enough to feel its strange texture, a slick, cold surface. Then it was gone. But Ferguson wasn't the same after that night. He never spoke of it to anyone. Not once. But Sam could see it in his eyes whenever he passed by, that distant, haunted look. Ferguson, like the rest of them, had changed. The laughter, the banter, it had all disappeared. And then came the final sign that this wasn't something any of them could escape. One evening, after a particularly terrifying episode of strange lights and noises, one of the men, a young recruit named McCarthy, went missing. He'd been walking back from the mess tent, and when the others went to check on him, he was gone. The search party found nothing, No trace of McCarthy, no tracks, no sign of struggle. It was as though he had just vanished from the face of the earth. But the silence that followed his disappearance was the loudest sound of all. Sam knew then that something had claimed him. Something that had always been there, just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to reach out. And now, that something was coming for them all. As the days turned into weeks, the unease within the trench deepened. The men's nerves were frayed, their minds growing unhinged by the constant barrage of unexplainable events. But something was stirring in the minds of those who had been there since the beginning. Something ancient. Something that went beyond just the object unearthed from the trench. It was clear now that the happenings weren't a result of stress or fatigue. No, there was a deeper, more sinister force at play. And the more they thought about it, the more they realized it wasn't new. This thing, this presence, had been lurking beneath the surface for far longer than they could have imagined. Sam was the first to voice it, though he wasn't sure he truly believed what he was saying when the words left his mouth. "What if this has all happened before?" he asked, his voice a hushed whisper in the otherwise silent camp. He could feel the weight of the words hanging in the air, the unease that had been growing inside of him like a festering wound. "What do you mean?" Ferguson had asked, his eyes sunken, hollow from nights of little sleep. Sam hadn't answered immediately. Instead, he had gone to his tent, rummaging through old papers, maps, and journals, anything he could find. Hours later, he came back with a dusty file in hand, the kind of file that no one had thought to open in years. The file had been left behind by a former commander, someone who had long since left the front lines. It wasn't anything extraordinary at first glance. A few maps, some old records of battles, and scattered notes. But then, amidst the pages filled with names and dates, Sam found something that made his blood run cold. A name. Corporal Arthur Bingham. The name meant nothing to Sam at first. He had never heard it before, and it didn't seem significant in the context of the war. But as he read further, he came across a line that would forever haunt him. Corporal Arthur Bingham, believed to have encountered unknown phenomena near Trench 17, August 1916. No further communication from Corporal Bingham after his last entry. That was it. The report had been dismissed as a casualty of the war. Another soldier lost to the chaos. Another death that was too common in those days. But Sam's gut twisted as he reread the entry. There had been something strange about that line. It wasn't just a casualty report. It was a quiet admission that something else had happened, something that was deemed unworthy of further investigation. Sam immediately sought out more details. There had to be more. The officer who wrote the report had to have known something. But no one knew much about Bingham. There were no surviving family members, no relatives to track down. Bingham had been a quiet man, one who blended into the ranks, his contributions often unnoticed by others. But his last entry had made one thing clear. Something had happened in Trench 17. Something connected to the very earth they were now digging into. That's when Sam realized. This wasn't the first time. The trench wasn't just a place for the living. It had been used before, long before the war, and not just as a passage for soldiers, but as something far more significant. This place had been a site of strange occurrences, even before the trench became a battleground. Sam spent days combing through the records, connecting dots that didn't seem to connect. The more he investigated, the more he found that Trench 17 had been the site of another strange discovery. An earlier excavation, one that had been classified and buried under layers of military secrecy. In the year before the war broke out, a group of archaeologists had been sent to the same area to dig into the ground for what they believed to be a series of ancient artifacts. Nothing out of the ordinary, just historical research. But when they unearthed a strange, otherworldly stone, everything changed. There were no official records, no reports, just a sudden, unexplained cancellation of the dig. Sam's mind raced. The same trench, the same area, the same earth that had been disturbed over and over again. This thing, the presence that had haunted the men for weeks, had been here before. It was ancient. It was waiting. And now the soldiers had uncovered it again. But what was it? What had been buried beneath the earth, hidden from the eyes of history only to resurface now? As the days wore on, the theories among the soldiers began to shift. Some of them believed it was a curse, a punishment, perhaps, for disturbing forces that were never meant to be awakened. Others, like Sam, began to think it was something far older, a remnant of a time long forgotten, something that had been buried, not by war or time, but by a much darker force, something that had once been part of the earth itself. Theories began to merge. The object they had unearthed in 1917, the one that had stirred the restless spirits in the trench, was connected to something far more significant than any of them had realized. It wasn't just an artifact. It wasn't just a cursed object. It was a part of something much larger. And Sam couldn't shake the feeling that they had only scratched the surface. Every night he heard the whispers again. The voices that had once been faint and far away were growing louder, more insistent. They weren't just warnings anymore. They were commands. They were calling to him. One evening, as the sky darkened and the men gathered around the campfire, Sam shared what he had learned. He couldn't hold it in anymore. He couldn't stay silent. "We have to stop digging," he said, his voice trembling with a fear he hadn't fully admitted to himself. "What we've uncovered, it's not just old. It's connected to something ancient, something that shouldn't be disturbed." But no one listened. The men were already too deep into it. Fear had set in, yes, but so had fascination. No one wanted to believe that the earth was trying to tell them something they weren't ready to understand. They had come this far. They were too far gone now. And so they dug deeper. But what they found next would change everything. The strange occurrences, which had started as subtle disturbances, soon turned into full-scale manifestations of something beyond human comprehension. The air in the trench grew thick with an unnatural chill, pressing in on the soldiers with a weight they couldn't explain. The sounds, whispers, growls, the scraping of something large and monstrous echoed from the dark corners of the trench, as if the earth itself was alive, waiting, breathing. And though the soldiers never spoke of it directly, there was a shared understanding that something malevolent had been unearthed in that pit. But it wasn't just the atmosphere. No, it wasn't just the inexplicable sounds or the eerie shadows that clung to the edges of their vision. It was something more, something tangible. One by one, the soldiers began to disappear. At first it was small. One man, Private Callahan, had gone to fetch water and hadn't returned. His comrades searched the trench and the surrounding area, but it was as if the ground had swallowed him whole. There were no signs of a struggle, no footprints leading away. It was as though he had just vanished. Then it happened again. Corporal McNeil was next. He had been acting oddly for days, his face pale, his movements sluggish, like something was slowly draining the life from him. He'd speak to the men, but his words didn't make sense. Sometimes he would smile in a way that seemed far too wide for comfort, like a grin that belonged to someone or something else. But that morning, McNeil was gone. The others found his rifle lying next to a pile of muddy leaves, but there was no trace of him, no sign of where he had gone. Just an empty trench, and the same unsettling silence. Ferguson, the once skeptical man who had seen the light in the distance, was the next to fall. His disappearance was more violent. One evening, after yet another horrifying series of screams pierced the night, the others found his tent torn open. His belongings were scattered across the ground, and his blanket was still warm, as though he had just been there. Yet Ferguson himself was nowhere to be found. The eerie sensation of eyes watching them, of something following them, was now almost overwhelming. But it wasn't the physical disappearances alone that rattled the soldiers. It was what they began to see, what they began to feel. In the dead of night, Sam woke with a start. Something wasn't right. His breath was shallow, and the hairs on his arms stood up, his senses on edge. He heard a soft scraping sound, like claws against stone, just outside his tent. At first he thought it was just another trick of the mind, some effect of exhaustion, but the sound came again. Closer this time. The scraping echoed through the night, sharp and desperate. He forced himself to rise, heart hammering in his chest, as he grabbed his rifle and stepped outside. And there, just beyond the dim circle of the campfire's light, he saw it. A shape. It was tall, taller than any man, and it moved with an unnatural grace, gliding just above the ground, as if floating rather than walking. Its form was a blur of darkness, but Sam could make out the faintest outline of something wrong. Long, twisted limbs that stretched and moved in ways that didn't belong to any human body. Its head was impossibly large, angular, with hollow eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. The light that had once beckoned them seemed to emanate from it, pulsing like a heartbeat, like the thrum of some ancient power. Sam froze. His rifle felt like a toy in his hands, too small to protect him from whatever this was. The creature, or thing, for that was what it had become, didn't approach him directly. It merely watched, its glowing eyes fixed on Sam, penetrating as if it could see straight through to his soul. He could feel it then, the oppressive weight of its gaze. It wasn't just looking at him, it was sensing him, its focus like a predator sizing up its prey. And for a long, terrifying moment, Sam stood frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe, as the creature loomed just beyond his reach. Then, without a sound, it vanished into the dark. Sam didn't know how long he stood there, his heart racing, his body trembling. When he finally snapped back to reality, he ran back to the safety of the other soldiers, but when he tried to speak, to tell them what he had seen, they just looked at him like he was losing his mind. They had seen strange things, too. Figures in the distance, flashes of light that didn't make sense, inexplicable noises that seemed to come from nowhere. But they didn't want to admit that something truly supernatural was happening. Sam wasn't sure which was worse, the thing he had seen, or the fact that no one believed him. But he knew what he had seen, and he knew it was only the beginning. The following morning, as the sun began to rise over the trench, Sam stumbled upon something that nearly broke him. It wasn't another missing soldier. This time, it was far worse. In the muddy earth, just a few feet from where he had seen the creature, was something that no man could ever comprehend. A mark, a symbol, a twisted, complex shape that seemed to shift and writhe before his eyes, as though it were alive. It looked like a star, a 5-pointed star, but each point was jagged, broken, as if someone had tried to carve it into the earth with a sharp instrument. At the center of the star was an eye, drawn with strange, looping symbols that Sam didn't recognize. The symbol seemed to pulse in the dim light of the morning, as though it were alive, and Sam felt a cold shiver run down his spine as his mind raced. It wasn't just an ordinary symbol, it was something ancient, something old, and something that had been buried here, beneath the earth, for a reason. But what was it trying to tell them? As Sam knelt down to inspect the symbol, his fingers hovering just above it, the ground beneath him suddenly trembled. The air went thick with a buzzing hum, and for a brief moment Sam thought he could hear something or someone whispering in the distance. A voice? Number A, warning. And then, just like that, the ground went still. The hum disappeared. The air felt empty, hollow, as if the earth itself had swallowed the sound. Sam's heart pounded in his chest as he stumbled back. He couldn't explain it. He couldn't even understand it. But he knew one thing. Whatever this was, whatever this force was, it was growing stronger. And it would not stop. Not until they were all gone. The air in the trench had become thick with unease. As the men watched their comrades disappear, as strange sights and sounds gripped the camp, a sense of growing dread began to take root. But what was really happening? Was it a curse, a haunting, or something more sinister? The men were caught between disbelief and terror, each searching for an explanation that made sense, but none could fully accept the truth of what they were experiencing. The more they discussed it, the further the divide grew. Was this the product of war's madness? Or was something else at work here? Something ancient, something unseen. Sam had tried, at first, to reason with the men. He had shared what he had uncovered about the trench's past, about the strange archaeological dig, the reports from Corporal Bingham, the mysterious symbols. He wanted to make them see that there was something much bigger happening, something connected to the earth itself, a force that was waiting for the right moment to break free. But the soldiers weren't ready for that. Not yet. Instead, they began to argue. Some clung to the rational, the scientific, attempting to explain away the inexplicable with ideas rooted in logic, however flawed. Others, more superstitious, believed this was the result of something far darker, a curse, a punishment for disturbing ancient forces. "It's just stress," Private Davenport said one night, his eyes bloodshot from sleeplessness. "All this madness, it's all in our heads. We're all just losing it, that's all. This war is enough to break anyone." But Sam knew better. He could see it in the faces of the men, how their eyes darted nervously at shadows, how their words faltered when they spoke of the disappearances. No one was losing it. Something real was happening here. Something that none of them could explain. "You think this is stress, Davenport?" Sam had asked, his voice low, almost shaking with the intensity of what he had seen. "I've seen things. Things that shouldn't be real. We're not just imagining this." Davenport had scoffed at first, but even he couldn't deny the terror that lingered in the air, suffocating them all. And it wasn't just the men who had begun to question reality. It was the earth itself. The trench had taken on an unnatural stillness, as though time itself had slowed. It wasn't just that the days felt longer or the nights colder. Number it was something else. The trench felt wrong. For those who dared to keep digging, there were even more questions. And no answers. Corporal McAllister, a man who had once dismissed the idea of ghosts and curses, now found himself recoiling at the very thought of going near the excavation site. It wasn't just the eerie glow that had started to appear each night, or the relentless whispering voices that seemed to fill the air. It was the ground itself. The dirt seemed to pulse, to breathe as if it were alive. And that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was the feeling of something watching. McAllister had said it best when he finally broke the silence. "We're not supposed to be here. Whatever we've dug up, it's not something meant for men. It's something else. Something that shouldn't be." But even with all the mounting evidence, the glowing symbols, the strange creature Sam had seen, the inexplicable disappearances. There were still those who held on to doubt. They wanted to believe that it was just another part of war's madness, that it was simply the product of too many sleepless nights in the trenches, too many horrors witnessed. The men gathered around the campfire one evening, each man silent, staring into the flames. Their faces were drawn, tired, and every word that was spoken felt like it carried a weight heavier than any of them could bear. "I saw something last night," said Sergeant Griffin, his voice trembling. He had been one of the strongest men in the company, but his once confident demeanor had been replaced with something darker, something that hinted at the terror he had been holding inside. "Not just shadows," he continued, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and disbelief. "I saw a figure, standing just beyond the trench. It was tall, almost too tall, and its eyes, God, its eyes, glowed like embers, like it was watching us. It didn't move, just stood there, watching." Sam had heard these kinds of stories before, but there was something different in Griffin's voice. The desperation, the raw terror that clung to every word. Sam couldn't ignore it anymore. He didn't want to believe it either, but there was no escaping what they had uncovered. "We can't keep pretending this is normal," Sam said, his voice quiet but firm. "We've dug too deep. Whatever's down there, whatever we've woken up, it's alive. It's ancient, and it wants us." There was a long silence after Sam spoke. None of the men wanted to acknowledge the truth of his words, but it hung in the air like smoke, thick and choking. And yet, no one moved to stop him. No one said anything. They all knew. Deep down, they all knew. Then, as if to confirm Sam's worst fears, the earth trembled again. A low, rumbling vibration that seemed to come from beneath them, shaking the very ground. The trench groaned, the dirt shifting, as though the earth itself was moving, alive, shifting, twisting. "Something's coming," Sam whispered, his heart pounding in his chest. There was no denying it now. No more room for doubt. The supernatural force that had awakened in Trench 17 was no mere haunting or curse. It was something far older, far darker, and far more dangerous than any of them could comprehend. They had unleashed it, and now they would have to face it. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, filling the trench with a chorus of voices, voices that seemed to beckon, pulling the men into the dark heart of whatever ancient force was stirring beneath them. And all Sam could think was, "What have we done?" Let me know when you're ready for Part 8. Ban John Noy, Continue ChatGPT John Noy, Part 8, Dangerous Investigation. The trench had become a nightmare. There was no way to sugarcoat it. The very ground beneath them seemed to pulse with life, and the air had taken on an electric charge, like something ancient and powerful was waking, and it was far from happy about being disturbed. The whispers were louder now, an almost tangible presence that hung in the air like a fog, wrapping around the men, following them wherever they went. The shadows, too, had become more persistent, darting out of the corner of their eyes, too quick to be real. But the men couldn't deny it any longer. The trench, the earth, the air itself, it was alive, and it wanted them gone. Still, despite everything, the desire to understand what was happening, the thirst for answers, was just as strong as the fear. As the days passed, the men could no longer ignore the reality of what was unfolding before them. Something had been unearthed, something that shouldn't have been, and now they were trapped in it, bound by the forces they didn't understand. But they couldn't stop now. Not after everything they had seen, not after what they had heard. Sam knew what had to be done. The only way to survive this, to make sense of it, all was to investigate further, to delve into the depths of the trench where the object had been buried, where the nightmares had begun. The others hesitated. but Sam could see it in their eyes. The same fear that had started to consume him. They were desperate for answers, and no matter how much they wanted to turn back, they couldn't. That evening, under the cover of a dark sky, Sam and a small group of men gathered. The trench, though eerily quiet now, felt different. The usual sounds, the clatter of equipment, the quiet murmurs of soldiers in the distance, were absent. Instead, the air was thick with tension, heavy and oppressive, like something unseen was watching them from the shadows. "We need to go back to the site," Sam said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "We have to know what we've uncovered. What it is. What it wants." "I don't know, Sam," Ferguson replied, his face pale, his voice shaking. "It's not just some relic. It's alive. Whatever it is, it's alive. We're playing with fire. We're going to end up like the others." Sam met Ferguson's gaze, but there was no room for hesitation now. He had seen too much to back down. "The others are gone because they didn't understand. If we don't do something now, it will claim the rest of us, one by one. We have to go back. We have to face it." There was no answer, just an uncomfortable silence. But Ferguson knew what Sam was saying was true. The men couldn't keep running, couldn't keep hiding from whatever was in the earth. It had already taken too much. If they didn't act now, they would all be lost. Reluctantly, the group set off. The trench was still, the night air carrying a bitter chill, and every step felt like it was dragging them closer to an inescapable fate. The men moved quickly, their eyes darting nervously into the dark, unable to shake the feeling that something was following them. The whispers, too, were louder now, almost deafening. They weren't just in their heads anymore. The voices were everywhere, swirling in the air, shifting with the wind, as if the earth itself was trying to communicate with them. Sam didn't know what to expect when they reached the excavation site. But when they arrived, the sight before them stopped them in their tracks. The ground was disturbed, torn up like something massive had emerged from beneath. But the object? The object they had unearthed? It was gone. The trench had been completely altered. The earth had been churned up, the once solid walls now caved in, as though whatever had been buried had pushed its way out, disturbing everything in its wake. The air was thick with a presence, heavy and oppressive, like something was watching them from every angle. "Where is it?" Ferguson asked, his voice barely audible as he stepped forward, his foot sinking slightly into the disturbed earth. "I don't know," Sam murmured. He felt a shiver crawl down his spine. It can't be gone. Then, just as quickly as the unease had settled over them, a low, guttural sound echoed from beneath the ground. Something deep, something vibrating with an unnatural frequency that reverberated in their bones. Sam's heart skipped a beat. It was the same sound he had heard the night he saw the creature. The scraping, the shuffling. Suddenly, the earth around them trembled, and the air thickened with a sharp, electric hum. The men staggered back, their eyes wide in panic as the ground split open before them and a blinding light poured from the crack. It was as if the earth itself was cracking open to reveal what had been buried for so long. The object, or whatever it was rising. It was massive. Its form shimmered and shifted, its surface slick and strange, like something made of both light and shadow. The air around it seemed to warp, bending as though reality itself couldn't hold on to its shape. Sam's eyes widened in terror as he saw the thing that had been hidden beneath the earth. Something not just unnatural, but incomprehensible. It wasn't human. No, it was beyond that. Its form was both angular and flowing, a mass of twisting shapes that defied the laws of nature, as though it were made of something that didn't belong in this world at all. The light it emitted was cold, harsh, like an electric current, but with a strange, alluring pull. And then it spoke. The voice came not from any mouth. It didn't need one. It sang in their minds, an alien hum that burrowed into their skulls, a tone that bypassed language entirely, yet they understood it. The message was simple. You have awakened me, and now you will serve me. The ground beneath them shook violently, and the men stumbled, their hearts racing as the light grew brighter, more intense, until it felt like their very souls were being pulled toward it. The whispers in the air grew louder, drowning out all thought, all reason. Sam turned to run, but his legs felt heavy, as though the air had turned to lead. He could hear the others shouting, but their voices were muffled, drowned out by the deafening hum. The presence was everywhere now, encroaching, suffocating, as if it were wrapping around them like a thick, wet cloth. Then, the ground cracked open further, and the thing rose higher, looming above them, its energy crackling in the air, and Sam realized with a sickening jolt of terror, it had been waiting for them, waiting for this moment. And now there was no escape. The world around them seemed to bend and warp. The once solid trench, the familiar ground they had all known, now felt like a different place entirely, alien, unwelcoming. The air crackled with an unnatural energy, thick with a sense of impending doom. It wasn't just the earth that had shifted. The very fabric of reality seemed to be tearing itself apart at the seams, as if the trench was a portal to something far beyond, their understanding. Sam's heart hammered in his chest, the pulse of fear pushing him into overdrive as the blinding light intensified, burning his eyes. He stumbled backward, his vision blurred by the unnatural glow. He could hear the others, shouting in panic, but their voices were drowned out by the suffocating hum that filled the air. It wasn't just sound. It was pressure, a force that weighed on him, pushing him down, making every breath feel like a struggle. The trench had become a battleground, not between soldiers, but between something far darker and far older than any of them could have imagined. And then the voice came again. A low, vibrating hum that wasn't just heard with the ears, but felt deep in the soul. It wasn't a voice in the traditional sense. It was thought, a presence communicating directly with their minds, bypassing language entirely. You have awakened me. Now you will become part of me. Sam's pulse quickened. The voice was alien, its tone both beautiful and terrifying, like a song that called out to some ancient part of the human psyche. He could feel it in his bones, the pull of something greater than himself. Something that didn't belong here. Something that had been buried beneath the earth for a reason. Behind him, he could hear the others scrambling, their footsteps frantic as they tried to escape. But there was no way out. The very air was closing in on them, thickening with each passing second. It was like trying to breathe underwater. Their minds felt heavy, as if the creature, this thing, was pulling them into its orbit, drawing them into something they couldn't escape. Sam's eyes darted around in a desperate search for a way out, but there was no escape. The trench itself had become a prison. The walls, once familiar, were now towering, looming above them like some kind of monolithic structure, as though the earth itself had reshaped itself to trap them inside. The thing was no longer hidden. It had emerged fully from the ground, an incomprehensible mass of shifting darkness and light. Its form was constantly changing, flowing in and out of shape, as if it couldn't decide what it was supposed to be. Its edges flickered like the jagged shards of a broken mirror, reflecting light in strange patterns, distorting the space around it. Sam couldn't even begin to make sense of it. There was no solid surface, no shape to hold on to. It was like looking at a living nightmare, a creature made of raw, chaotic energy. The others were falling apart around him. Ferguson was on the ground, his hands pressed to his ears, trying to block out the voice, the thoughts, but there was no escape. Private Davenport was staring at the creature, his face pale and slack, his eyes wide in a trance, as though the very sight of it had stripped him of his will. Sam stumbled forward, his mind racing. There had to be a way to stop it. There had to be a way to stop whatever had been awakened. But the more he thought, the more the words, "You will serve me," echoed in his mind, louder and louder. The more they fought it, the stronger the pull became. And then something shifted. The ground trembled beneath their feet again. But this time, it wasn't just the trench shaking. It was the world. The very earth beneath them seemed to breathe, shifting, cracking, and groaning as though it were alive. The stars in the sky above flickered and distorted, like they were being pulled into the abyss. In the distance, the sky darkened. The clouds twisted, swirling into a shape that was impossible to comprehend, like the outline of a massive, monstrous figure made of swirling black mist and flashing light. It was as if the thing wasn't just in the trench, it was everywhere. And then, the thing moved. It wasn't a movement like anything they knew. It didn't walk or crawl, it shifted. It was like watching the very concept of movement change, like time itself was being bent. One moment, it was on the ground, a dark mass curling upward. The next, it was hovering above them, its massive form expanding, contracting, like some terrible, unfathomable force, trying to break free from the confines of the world. Sam felt his breath catch in his throat as it reached for him. It was as if the creature, the presence, was aware of him, wanted him, and in that instant, he realized something horrifying. He wasn't just witnessing something from another world. He was part of it now. The thing was part of him. It had been feeding on them, on their fear, on their doubts, growing stronger with every passing moment. And now, it was going to claim him. A sharp cry broke through his thoughts. He turned to see Ferguson stumbling forward, his eyes wild, as if he were in some kind of trance. He reached out toward the creature, his arms outstretched like a puppet, his body moving as though it wasn't his own. And before Sam could shout a warning, Ferguson was enveloped by the thing, pulled into its shifting form, his body consumed by the light, his scream swallowed by the abyss. And then, the world froze. The trench, the air, the ground, everything stood still, as if time itself had stopped. Sam stood, paralyzed, unable to move, unable to think as the creature shifted around him. Its form became clearer, its features more distinct. The shimmering light dimmed, revealing the truth of what it was. It was not just a creature, it was something ancient, something older than the earth itself. It was not made of flesh or bone. It was made of thoughts, of ideas, of pure, unadulterated force. It was a mind, a consciousness that had existed long before humanity had even risen to walk the earth. And now it had found them. Found him. Its voice echoed in his mind, cold and powerful. "You will join me. You will be mine." The words rang out like a death knell, and Sam's knees buckled beneath him, his body collapsing to the ground. His thoughts, his very will, began to slip away. He could feel it. The presence was consuming him, erasing everything he had been, everything he had known. It was taking him into itself, merging with him, like a parasite feeding on his mind. But then, something shifted again. A sudden, inexplicable force of will surged through Sam. He pushed back against the mind that was consuming him, his thoughts rising in defiance. He didn't know how, but somehow he found the strength to break free, to pull himself away from the creature's grasp, even if only for a moment. The trench trembled again. The creature screamed, its voice not heard but felt, like a deep, searing wave of pure terror. It was weakening. But Sam knew it wouldn't stop. Not unless he did something. The last thought that crossed his mind was clear. There was one way to stop it. He had to destroy it. The ground continued to tremble beneath Sam's feet, the air thick with an unbearable weight. The trench, once a familiar place, now felt like the belly of some great beast, its walls closing in, suffocating him with every breath. The thing, the entity that had risen from the earth, was not just a presence now. It was a force, a raw, indescribable power that had twisted and contorted the very fabric of the world around them. Sam could feel its reach, its cold fingers brushing against his mind, pulling at his thoughts, trying to drag him into the darkness where it could claim him for good. He struggled to stand, his legs weak beneath him, his chest heaving with panic. His mind raced, trying to hold on to some sliver of rationality. But the more he tried to think, the harder it became. The entity wasn't just attacking them physically. It was attacking their very sense of reality, bending their perceptions, drowning them in terror. And yet, in the chaos, one thought pierced through the haze of fear. He had to stop it. He had to destroy it. But how? As the minutes stretched on, every second felt like an eternity. Sam could hear the others, their voices lost in the whirlwind of their own fear and desperation. Ferguson was gone, his body absorbed into the thing like it had been swallowed by the earth. The others were scattered, trapped by the creature's will, their minds slowly crumbling under its influence. Davenport was the first to fall to his knees, clutching his head as if trying to keep it from exploding. His breath was rapid, shallow, as if the very air around him was pressing in on his chest, choking the life out of him. His eyes were wide and glazed, staring at the creature with a look of hopeless surrender. He was fighting it, Sam could see that. But the creature was stronger. It was breaking him down, piece by piece, until nothing remained but fear. "Davenport!" Sam shouted, his voice breaking through the cacophony of whispers and mental screams that filled the air. "You have to fight it, fight it!" But Davenport didn't respond. His eyes flickered once, then went blank, as if he were already gone, his soul consumed by the dark force. Sam's stomach churned. There was nothing he could do for him. Not now. He had to act fast. He couldn't afford to lose anyone else. The thing, it was still pulsing with that eerie light, a constant thrum that echoed in Sam's skull. It loomed over them like a living nightmare, shifting and changing, like a massive, undulating cloud of dark energy. And at its center, the eye, the symbol, the mark he had seen earlier in the trench, flashed, glowing brighter, sharper. It was the key. He knew it. It had to be. But how could he get to it? How could he destroy something so vast, so incomprehensible? Sam's mind raced, the fear threatening to swallow him whole. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a spark of clarity flickered. A thought, an idea, no, an instinct. It didn't come from his mind alone. It was as if his body, his soul, recognized the truth before his conscious mind could catch up. The thing, the creature, it was connected to the very earth itself. It had been buried for a reason, and now it was feeding on the disturbance, feeding on the terror they had unleashed. Sam's hand gripped his rifle tighter, the cold metal biting into his skin. The rifle, of course. The object. The strange, unknown thing they had unearthed. It wasn't just a relic. It was the key. He had to destroy the source, the anchor, the trench itself. The object was the focal point, the link between their world and whatever dark force was trying to break through. The others were still trapped, their bodies frozen in place, their minds lost in the grip of the entity. He had to do it alone. He had no choice. With a surge of determination, Sam forced himself to move toward the epicenter of the chaos, toward the dark mass of the creature. The very ground beneath him seemed to fight him, pushing back with every step. It was as though the earth itself was alive, resisting him, trying to prevent him from getting any closer to the object. The air was thick with the hum of the creature's power, a force that gnawed at his very soul. But Sam couldn't stop. He wouldn't stop. He had no choice. For all he knew, this was the last chance they had to stop it. The thing couldn't be allowed to reach out further. He had to destroy it now, before it swallowed the world whole. As he reached the center of the trench, he finally saw it. The object, half buried in the ground, its surface glowing faintly with a cold, eerie light. It looked so simple, so ordinary. And yet Sam knew, deep down, that it was anything but. It was the key, the focus, the object that had disturbed the ancient force that had been lying dormant for centuries. Sam knelt down and grabbed the rifle in his hands, aiming it at the object. His hands were shaking, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He could feel the creature watching him, its presence seeping into his mind, trying to break him, to make him doubt. But he wouldn't falter. Not now. He pulled the trigger. The sound of the gunshot rang out like a thunderclap in the night, reverberating through the trench. The bullet struck the object. For a moment, nothing happened. And then, the ground shook. The creature howled, a terrible, guttural sound that sent shockwaves through the air. The trench itself seemed to crack and splinter, the earth trembling as if in agony. Sam's ears rang with the force of the sound, his body thrown backward by the sheer force of the impact. But he couldn't stop now. He couldn't give in to the overwhelming sensation that threatened to pull him under. The object was cracking, splitting, shattering, and as it did, something began to change. The creature, no longer a single entity, but a mass of writhing darkness, began to collapse. The light dimmed, the energy weakening as the object cracked open like an ancient egg, spilling out a strange, viscous substance that seemed to burn the very air it touched. Sam stumbled back, gasping for breath as the creature's form twisted and writhed, as though in pain. The trench, too, seemed to groan and crack under the pressure, but slowly, surely, the oppressive weight began to lift. The air lightened, the hum in his skull faded, and the earth stilled. It was over. But was it really? For a moment, everything stood still. The trench, once alive with the hum of unnatural energy, now felt eerily quiet. The oppressive weight that had hung over them for so long seemed to lift, leaving nothing but an uncomfortable silence. Sam's heart pounded in his chest, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins, but as he looked around, he felt no sense of triumph, no relief. Instead, there was only an overwhelming sense of dread. The creature, whatever it was, had been weakened, but Sam knew that the destruction of the object wasn't the end. It couldn't be. The force that had been awakened, the ancient presence that had fed on their fear, still lingered in the air, like a shadow waiting for its next opportunity to strike. The others, still shaken from the events that had unfolded, remained frozen in place. Sam's gaze swept over them, his mind racing. The creature was collapsing, yes, but what had it left behind? What lingering traces of its power still lingered within the trench? His eyes fell on the ground where the object had once been. The shattered remains of the strange, glowing artifact were scattered around, like fragments of a puzzle. But even as the light from the object faded, something new caught his attention. Buried beneath the broken pieces, something was glinting. A small metallic object, no larger than the size of his palm. He knelt down, his breath shaky, and carefully reached for it. His fingers brushed the cool surface, and for a moment, he hesitated. Could this be another part of the object? Another key to understanding what had happened? He picked it up. The object was a small, intricately carved stone, smooth, polished, and surprisingly warm to the touch, despite the chill that had settled over the trench. It was unlike anything Sam had ever seen before. It didn't belong in this world. He knew that instinctively. The markings on it seemed almost alive, shifting in the dim light, as though the stone was breathing. It didn't feel like it was made. It felt grown. As Sam turned the stone over in his hands, a sharp memory flashed in his mind. The symbols, the markings. They matched those that had appeared in the glowing light just before the creature had risen from the earth. But this stone, this was different. It felt important. It wasn't just another artifact. It was a piece of something greater, something far older than he could ever comprehend. A sharp noise broke through his thoughts. Sam looked up to see Davenport slowly rising to his feet. The young soldier's face was pale, his eyes wide, but there was something else in his expression. A confusion, a realization that mirrored Sam's own. Davenport's gaze met the stone in Sam's hands, and for a brief, unsettling moment, it was as though the young soldier recognized it. That stone, Davenport murmured, his voice shaky. Where did you... Before Sam could answer, the ground trembled again. The faint rumble that had become so familiar now shook the trench once more. But this time, it wasn't just the earth beneath their feet. It was the very air itself that seemed to vibrate. Something was moving below. The thing. It wasn't gone. It hadn't been destroyed at all. It had merely retreated. The stone in Sam's hand pulsed with energy, the carvings lighting up once more. His heart skipped a beat. It was like the stone had awakened, as though it was responding to the force that still lingered beneath them. "We have to get out of here," Davenport said urgently, his voice cracking with fear. But Sam couldn't move. He couldn't take his eyes off the stone. It was pulling him in, demanding his attention, as if it held the answers to everything, the answers that had eluded him for so long. He turned it over again in his hand, examining the markings, the smooth surface. There had to be more to this than he realized. And then he saw it, a small, almost imperceptible crack along the stone's edge, a faint seam, barely visible in the dim light. Sam's pulse quickened as he pressed his thumb against it, feeling a faint, almost magnetic pull. The crack opened. The stone split down the middle, revealing something hidden inside. It was a tiny, metal cylinder, perfectly smooth, like the surface of a mirror, and impossibly cold to the touch. Sam's breath caught in his throat as he realized that this was no ordinary object. It was a message, a clue. He turned the metal cylinder over in his hand, noticing the small engraving etched into its surface. It was a series of strange symbols, different from the markings on the stone, but they were similar. And suddenly, the pieces began to fall into place. This wasn't just about the trench. It wasn't about the creature or the object that had been unearthed. It was about something much bigger, a larger pattern, a history that had been hidden, buried beneath layers of time and memory. And whoever had left this behind, whoever had created these objects, had done so for a reason. This wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. "This isn't over," Sam whispered, his voice trembling. He looked at the others, his eyes wide with realization. "Whatever this is, it's part of something larger, something that's been going on for a long time." Davenport's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but Sam saw the fear there too. The creature, the stone, the symbols, it was all connected. But to what end? What was this entity? And what had it been waiting for all this time? The rumbling beneath their feet grew louder, and the sky above them darkened, casting the trench into an unnatural twilight. The air felt heavier now, as though something was approaching, something much worse than what they had already faced. And as Sam looked down at the metal cylinder in his hands, the final chilling thought crossed his mind. They had only just begun to uncover the truth. The world around them seemed to hum with a growing intensity, the air thick with anticipation. The trench, once a place of bloodshed and death, now felt like a threshold between worlds, a place where time itself had unraveled. And yet, despite the terror and confusion, there was a strange sense of inevitability. It wasn't just the earth shifting beneath them anymore. The trench had become a living thing, its very essence intertwined with the ancient force that had been awakened. Sam's hands shook as he held the small metal cylinder, the symbols on its surface now almost burning into his mind. It was as though the object itself was communicating with him, pulling him into its orbit, urging him to understand. He turned it over again, the faint markings now clearer, more insistent. They weren't just random symbols. They were a language, a message, a warning. "This isn't the first time," Sam repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "This is part of something much bigger, a cycle, something that keeps coming back." Davenport, still shaken but increasingly aware of the gravity of the situation, leaned in closer. "What do you mean by cycle? Are you saying this has happened before?" Sam didn't answer immediately. His thoughts were racing. His heart pounded in his chest, a sickening realization spreading through him. Everything that had happened, the trench, the object, the creature, the symbols, it wasn't a random event. It wasn't just some supernatural anomaly that had emerged from nowhere. It was planned. It had all been set in motion long before they arrived. Sam could see it now, in his mind's eye. The pattern, the ancient ritual, the way the earth had been disturbed, the way the objects had been unearthed, and the way the creature had responded. It was all a part of something much older, something that had been repeating itself for centuries, maybe even longer. "We have to go back," Sam said suddenly, his voice urgent. "There's a place, a spot in the trench. It's where the object was buried. We have to go there now." Davenport's eyes flickered with confusion. "What are you talking about? We're not going back there. It's too dangerous." "We have to go back," Sam interrupted, his voice firm, resolute. "I think I know how to stop it, or at least slow it down." Without another word, Sam turned and started walking, ignoring the protests from the others. He had no time to explain. They had to understand. They had to follow him. The trench had become a maze, the once familiar walls now twisted and shifting, as if the very earth had bent to the will of the creature. The air was thick with a sense of wrongness, like the trench was no longer just a place. It was part of something much darker, part of a larger ritual that had been set into motion long ago. As Sam and Davenport made their way deeper into the trench, the ground trembled again, a low, rumbling vibration that sent shivers down Sam's spine. It wasn't the creature, not directly anyway, but something else. Something connected to the ancient force that had risen. The air was alive with whispers again, but now they were louder, more distinct, like a chant, like a voice calling out from the depths of the earth. The symbols on the metal cylinder pulsed in Sam's hand, responding to the vibrations, as though they were alive, as though they recognized the force that was stirring beneath them. The trench walls seemed to close in around them as they reached the spot Sam had been searching for. It was here that they had unearthed the object, the original artifact that had started it all. But now, the trench was different. The dirt had been disturbed again, and there was something new, something sinister, a mark. It was subtle at first, a faint carving in the earth, a pattern that matched the symbols Sam had seen earlier. As he knelt down, the mark seemed to glow faintly, pulsing with the same energy that had emanated from the stone. He reached out, fingers trembling, and traced the lines with his fingertips. A sudden, sharp pain shot through his hand. It was as though the earth itself had bitten him, like it was rejecting his touch. But Sam didn't pull away. He pressed harder, feeling the burn of the mark as it seemed to respond to his presence. Then, with a deep, resonant hum, the ground began to shift. The trench walls cracked, and the air seemed to warp around them. The earth began to pull itself apart again, but this time it wasn't just a tremor. No, this was something active, something working against them, pushing back against the very fabric of their reality. The creature, the force beneath them, was reacting to the disturbance. It was awakening once more. "It's starting again," Davenport said, his voice tight with fear. "We have to get out of here." But Sam didn't listen. He couldn't. The mark, it was a key, a part of the cycle. Everything was tied together. The object, the creature, the symbols. It was all connected to this spot in the trench, and the force that had been buried beneath the earth wasn't finished yet. It had been waiting, perhaps for centuries, for the right moment to break free. And now, it was almost here. The ground cracked open beneath them with a deafening roar. A pulse of energy surged through the trench, and Sam's vision blurred as the very fabric of the world seemed to tear. The sky above twisted into a kaleidoscope of shifting shapes, like reality itself was unraveling. And then it appeared again. The creature. But this time, it wasn't a formless mass of darkness. This time, it had shape, it had form. It was taller than ever before, its body twisting and writhing, its eyes glowing with a blinding intensity. It wasn't just watching them anymore. It was reaching for them. It was pulling them into its grasp, its presence filling the trench like a flood of ancient power. Sam's mind raced. There was only one thing left to do. He had to finish what he started. He had to stop it before it consumed everything, the stone, the metal cylinder. It was the final piece. It had to be. With a final burst of energy, Sam slammed the stone into the mark, pressing it deep into the ground. For a moment, nothing happened. And then, the ground exploded. The earth beneath them cracked wide open. The force of the explosion sent Sam hurtling backwards, his body thrown against the trench wall with bone-jarring impact. His vision swam, the world around him spinning as the deafening roar of the blast filled his ears. Dirt and debris rained down, obscuring everything, but Sam could still hear it. The hum. That eerie, vibrating pulse that had once been a whisper, but now was a full-throated scream, pounding at his mind, making his thoughts scatter like leaves in a storm. He struggled to his feet, the pain in his side sharp and immediate, but he forced himself to focus. The creature, the presence, was still here. And it was angry. He could feel it deep in his bones. This wasn't the creature they had faced before. It had been released. And whatever was left of the trench, the place where it had been imprisoned, was no longer safe. His head spun as he looked around, the landscape twisted and unreal. The trench walls, which had once been solid, were now warped, crumbling, like they were being pulled in on themselves. The ground was alive, churning with dark energy, undulating as though the earth itself was breathing, writhing beneath him. And there it was, the creature. It wasn't just a mass of shifting darkness anymore. It had shape, flesh, if it could even be called that, long limbs that were impossibly long and sinewy, bending and twisting in unnatural ways. Its body shimmered with a pale, sickly glow, the light casting distorted shadows across the trench. The face, if it could even be called a face, was barely humanoid, an ever-changing mask of anguish and rage, eyes glowing with an intensity that burned through Sam's chest, straight into his soul. It was more powerful now, more focused. It knew him. It had been waiting for him, for this moment. Sam gasped for air, his heart hammering in his chest. His hand, still clutching the shattered remnants of the stone, trembled. He had to stop it. He had to find a way to end it once and for all. But how? The creature's presence filled the trench, crushing him with the weight of its power, its malevolent will pushing against his mind, trying to bend him, break him. Sam fought back, his teeth gritted in determination, his fingers tight around the fragments of the stone. He didn't have much time. He didn't have much strength left. He had to use it, the metal cylinder, the key, the thing that had been buried beneath the earth. Sam pressed it into the broken stone, feeling it click together, like a lock falling into place. The symbols on the stone flickered, glowing in the darkness, their patterns shifting, aligning, as though they were responding to something far older than any of them. And then, just as the creature lunged forward, its dark limbs stretching toward him like twisted roots, the stone pulsed with light. A blinding flash. The creature recoiled, its hideous form writhing in agony as the light from the stone exploded outward, bathing everything in a cold, white radiance. Sam shielded his eyes, his heart pounding as he felt the power of the stone surge through him. It wasn't just a force. It was pure. It was ancient. And for a moment, he could feel the presence of whatever had created it. Something old, something far older than the earth itself, reaching out to him through the light. The creature screamed. A high, unnatural sound that pierced the air, ripping through Sam's ears and rattling his bones. It was as if the creature was being torn apart, its very essence unraveling, the light flooding through its dark form, burning away everything that made it real. For a split second, time seemed to stop. And then, the creature exploded. The trench walls buckled and twisted as the darkness was torn apart by the sheer force of the light. Sam felt the ground shift violently beneath him, but he refused to look away. He had to see this through. He had to be sure. And then, with a final deafening roar, the creature collapsed into nothingness. The light dimmed, and the world fell silent. The trench was still. Sam stood, panting, his heart still racing, his limbs heavy with exhaustion. His body felt like it had been drained, hollowed out by the sheer force of what he had just witnessed. But as the silence stretched on, a strange calm descended over the trench. The oppressive weight, the feeling of being trapped between worlds, was gone. The air felt lighter. The earth beneath his feet, though still cracked and broken, no longer hummed with that dark, ancient energy. It was over. Or was it? The sky above, once dark and swirling with ominous clouds, had cleared. The stars were visible again, though they twinkled oddly, as if the world had just shifted back into place. But as Sam looked down at the shattered pieces of the stone, a gnawing doubt began to creep into his mind. He had done it. He had stopped the creature. The trench was no longer alive with the presence of that ancient force. But the object, the metal cylinder, the key, was still in his hand, its symbols now glowing faintly, as though they were waiting for something, as though the cycle wasn't truly over. Sam's fingers tightened around the cylinder. This wasn't the end. The creature had been part of something larger, something that had been waiting beneath the earth for centuries. And whatever had started it, whatever had bound it to this place, was far from finished. As the trench settled into an uneasy stillness, Sam realized with a chilling certainty that the battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. The silence was deafening. It was a strange kind of quiet that settled over the trench after the creature's destruction, as though the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. Waiting for what, Sam wasn't sure. The weight of the moment hung thick in the air. The creature, the force that had terrorized them all for so long, was gone. The trench, once alive with an unnatural hum, was still. The darkness had been driven away. But even as Sam stood there, his chest still heaving from the intensity of the confrontation, a feeling of unease settled deep in his gut. He had won. Yes, but there was something else, something he couldn't shake. The stone in his hand, the key, was still pulsing with a faint, almost imperceptible light. The symbols, once chaotic, had now settled into a steady rhythm, almost like the beat of a heart, a warning, or perhaps a promise. "This can't be it," Sam whispered to himself, his voice low, full of disbelief. He looked around at the others, Davenport, still recovering from the ordeal, standing shakily to his feet, and the others who had survived. But the truth was clear. No one spoke. No one moved. It was as though they all felt it too, the nagging feeling that this wasn't truly over. Suddenly a deep rumble shook the ground beneath them. It wasn't the tremor they had felt before. No, this was different. It was more powerful, more focused. The ground beneath Sam's feet cracked again, and for a moment he thought he saw something in the distance, just beyond the trench's boundary. Shadows, swirling and shifting like dark smoke, but they were too quick to make out. His heart raced as he turned, eyes scanning the horizon. "Not again," Davenport breathed, his voice barely audible. The shadows were moving closer, not from above, but from within the earth. Sam's eyes widened as the realization hit him with a sickening force. This wasn't just a battle against one entity. It was a cycle, and the trench, the object, the key, they were all part of it. Part of a greater plan that had been unfolding long before they ever arrived. The rumble intensified, a deep, guttural sound that felt like it was coming from the very heart of the earth. The trench walls began to shake violently. Sam stumbled, nearly losing his footing as the ground shifted beneath him, cracks splitting wider with every passing second. It wasn't just the trench that was moving, the earth was changing. Something was emerging from within, something ancient, something powerful, and this time Sam knew. It wasn't just another creature. It wasn't just another beast waiting to be unleashed. This was the true source, the thing that had been pulling the strings all along. "Get back," Sam shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos as he waved the others away from the edge of the trench. But his words were lost in the wind, as the ground cracked open like a wound, the soil parting to reveal something beneath. It was like watching the earth itself give birth to something horrifying, its dark presence crawling up from below. And then they saw it. A massive form began to rise from the depths. It was unlike anything Sam had ever seen before, too large to comprehend. It was as though the earth had split open to release an entire city, a structure formed from something beyond stone and metal, something pulsing with an unnatural energy. It was ancient, towering over them like a dark cathedral, its jagged spires reaching up toward the sky. The air around it shimmered with heat, as if it was alive, breathing, waiting for something. And then, something even more horrifying happened. The figure began to move. It was slow at first, its motions deliberate, almost calculated. But as it rose higher, its shape became clearer. It was like a massive, twisted amalgamation of dark, jagged stone and living tissue, its form constantly shifting as though it was struggling to remain in a single shape. Its eyes, countless eyes, glowing with an infernal light, fixed on Sam and the others. And they could feel it, deep in their bones. The presence was overwhelming, a force so ancient and powerful that it seemed to stretch beyond comprehension. The entity wasn't just watching them, it was aware of them, and it wanted them. "No! No! No!" Davenport's voice cracked with panic. It's still alive. It never left." Sam's mind raced, his thoughts whirling as the truth began to settle in. The creature wasn't the end. It had been the beginning. The force, the presence that had been buried under the earth had been waiting, lying dormant for so long. And now it was awake, and it was hungry. Sam stumbled backward, heart pounding, his grip tightening around the shattered pieces of the stone. It was the only weapon they had left, the only way to fight it. But deep down, he knew it wasn't enough. The power that had been released in the trench wasn't just of this world. It had origins that stretched back further than history itself. And now, it had risen again. "I have to do it," Sam whispered, his voice shaking. He knew what he had to do. He knew what had to happen to stop it. They could fight it, yes, but only if they could find the key. The true key to ending the cycle. The real reason this thing had been bound beneath the earth for centuries. He turned to Davenport. "The stone. The cylinder. We have to use it. It's the only way." But before they could act, a terrible roar split the air. A scream of raw power and anguish as the entity rose higher, its presence growing with each passing second. The trench was shaking more violently now. Dirt and debris flew into the air, and the ground beneath them splintered. And then, just as Sam raised his hand to use the stone, everything stopped. The roar vanished, the ground stilled. Sam's heart skipped a beat as he realized something had shifted. He wasn't sure how, but the entity, the dark force, had paused. Why? Before he could understand what was happening, the stone in his hand began to vibrate. Not just the symbols this time, the entire stone hummed with a power Sam hadn't felt before. The energy was coursing through him, pulling him in. And in that moment, he understood. The stone wasn't just a key, it was a choice, and the entity knew it. It wasn't just trying to stop them anymore, it was trying to make them choose. The light from the stone pulsed with increasing intensity. The marks, the patterns began to shift and change, as if revealing something hidden beneath them. Sam was standing at the precipice of a decision, one that could change everything. The world seemed to hold its breath. The ground had stilled, the earth beneath Sam's feet quiet for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The trench, once a place of unimaginable horror, had transformed into something different. Not a sanctuary. No. There was no safety here, not anymore. But the raw power, the force that had been unleashed, had quieted. For now. Sam stood at the edge of the abyss. The stone in his hand pulsed again, its energy surging through him, vibrating with a strange, magnetic force. It was almost as if it was alive, sensing the darkness that lay before them, waiting for his next move. The entity, the enormous being that had emerged from the depths of the earth, hovered in the distance. It had stopped moving, its shape frozen, its countless glowing eyes locked on Sam. It seemed to be watching, waiting for him to make a decision. It wasn't just a creature, not anymore. It was something else, something ancient, something intelligent, and above all, something alive in a way that was beyond their comprehension. Sam could feel it, the pressure building within him, the weight of the choice he had to make. He could sense that the stone was more than just a weapon. It was a key, a bridge, a connection between him and the entity. The glowing eyes of the creature flickered, pulsing with an intensity that sent a chill down Sam's spine. For a moment, he thought he could hear it in his mind. A voice, deep and ancient, something that wasn't speaking with words but with raw intent. The entity wanted him. It wanted him to choose. What could he do? Could he really stop it? Was there even a way? The whispers were back, more insistent now, flooding his thoughts. They weren't just warnings, they were commands. The stone in his hand seemed to demand something from him. Was it trying to pull him in? To take him? Or was it trying to force him to make a decision that he wasn't ready to face? Sam's breath quickened. He had done everything he could to fight this creature, this force, but now it had grown stronger. It had become something more than a shadow, something more than a creature. It was the embodiment of an ancient, unearthly power that had been waiting. The sky above them had darkened again. The stars blinked out, one by one, until the world was consumed in an unnatural twilight. The entity was close now, its shape no longer a distant shadow, but something that stretched across the entire trench. Its massive form loomed over Sam and the others, its presence suffocating. He could feel its pull. "Sam," Davenport's voice broke through the haze of thoughts, but it barely registered in Sam's mind. "What are you doing? Don't do it! Please!" Sam didn't look at him. His eyes remained fixed on the stone in his hand, his heart hammering in his chest. He could feel the vibrations in the air. The pulse of the stone was getting stronger, almost unbearable. He was running out of time. The entity's form shifted again, and a voice that was not a voice at all, but a flood of thoughts, words, intent, echoed in Sam's mind. It was calling to him, drawing him in. It was as if the trench, the stone, and the creature were all connected in some way, all part of an ancient plan. "Join me. You will become part of me. You will be the key." Sam could feel the stone burning in his hand. It wasn't just an object anymore. It was a choice. He could use it. He could destroy the entity for good. But at what cost? Would the trench, the earth, the world survive the backlash of that kind of destruction? Or would it destroy everything? Could he handle the responsibility? Was he strong enough? But there was something more. Something he hadn't realized until now. The stone wasn't just a key to stopping the creature. It was also a part of the cycle. A choice he had to make. If he used it, there would be consequences. If he didn't, the creature would rise again, stronger than before, and there was no escaping it. This had been happening for centuries, Sam now understood. It was a cycle, an endless loop. The trench, the object, the power, everything had been leading to this moment. Suddenly the stone grew hotter in his hand, as though reacting to his thoughts, to his realization. The presence of the entity grew stronger, more insistent. It was in his mind now, whispering directly to him. "You know what must be done. Join me. Together we will end this cycle, and you will never be alone again." For a brief, terrifying moment, Sam thought he would give in. He thought the stone's power would overwhelm him, that the entity would consume him. He could feel the pull, the temptation to just let go and let the power take over. He understood now. The creature had been feeding on their fear, their desperation. It had been manipulating them all along, pushing them into this corner so that Sam would make this choice. But then, something inside of Sam snapped. He had fought too hard. Too many lives had been lost. He couldn't let it end this way. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and let go of the stone. For a moment, everything went silent. The earth seemed to pause, the very air still, as if the world itself was waiting for what would happen next. And then, with one final burst of energy, Sam hurled the stone into the trench, deep into the heart of the broken earth. The light exploded once more. Maybe this was never about understanding. The trench, the sky, the very fabric of reality ripped open. The explosion of energy that followed was so intense, so overwhelming, that Sam couldn't even comprehend it. For a split second, it felt like the world was ending, and then, just as quickly, it was over. The trench was silent. The creature was gone. Sam looked around, his body battered and bruised from the force of the explosion. He was alive, but so much had changed. The air felt different, the earth beneath his feet still trembling, but it wasn't the same. The cycle had been broken. Or had it? The metal cylinder, the stone, the object, they were gone. The trench had been sealed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Sam felt a strange peace. But as he looked into the distance, where the shadows had once crept, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there. Something had been stirred, and the true nature of the force they had encountered, of the cycle, remained a mystery. Could this really happen again? Was it truly over? Or had they only delayed what was destined to happen? Leave your thoughts below. Thank you for watching.